Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? Nod like this if you're doing well. Yes, yes. Come on in, come on in. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to Laura and Gary Lauder for welcoming us into their lovely home last night. Wasn't that great? It was so great. Yeah, give them a round of applause. So nice. I also want to just point something out. You know, we have an amazing set every year, and I mean, this is an incredible one, I think. This footage that you see here is live from the campus. I don't think people realize that, so just wanted to point that out. We're starting off with a topic today that is both fascinating and disturbing. The idea that deliberate misinformation is being served to the general public in the form of fake news. Major news networks have been accused of peddling it, and people struggle to sort out fact from fiction on their social media feeds. Here to weigh in, please welcome Isaac Lee, Andrea Mitchell, and David Sanger with Fortune's Adam Lashinsky.
Good morning, everybody. Try it again. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my great pleasure to welcome a distinguished panel on an unfortunately an important topic. To my right is Isaac Lee, who is the Chief Content Officer for Univision and for Televisa, which is Mexico's leading broadcaster.
Correct.
And a veteran Colombian journalist before he became a news executive, I guess. Andrea Mitchell, who needs really no introduction, of NBC News, Chief Foreign Policy Correspondent, and David Sanger, the Chief Foreign Policy Correspondent, National Security Correspondent for the New York Times. We have a complicated topic to get into very quickly this morning because fake news really means at least two things. The original meaning was this business of criminals in places like Eastern Europe and elsewhere putting fake stories on places like Twitter and Facebook, sometimes to make money, sometimes to hurt candidates. The completely new definition is the definition that the President of the United States has labeled anytime he doesn't like a story in the media about him. We've seen it just today. Isaac, I want to turn to you first. Most people probably don't know that you oversee The Onion. It's funny because in a sense, The Onion invented fake news in a completely earnest way.
Timing is great.
How did we get here?
I don't know, but I think that The Onion plays a very important role to differentiate that what we do is to actually use satire to point out the absurdity of fake news. And what people that are using fake news as a tool do is to use and focus on the biases and fears of people to perpetuate ignorance. And those two things are very different. So I think that The Onion will be playing a huge role in the next couple of years, for some reason.
I don't know if they're ready. I promised we wouldn't do it soon if we can't do it quickly. The Onion actually did something recently that I know you want to show. It may come up on the screen in a moment. When it does, it's right there. Tell everybody what they're looking at, Isaac.
Well, we published a 700-page document dump that is absolutely classified. And you can see there intercepted emails, the president's own doodles, tons of things that are what you would find today in a White House secret file.
Andrea, did you ever think we would come to this moment where we would be, this stuff is funny. It always was funny, but it's pretty darn realistic.
It's life imitating art, art imitating life. We're at a really difficult crossroads, though, for those of us in the media who deal with this every day. There is the fake news, the bots, the criminal enterprises. We're only beginning to get to the bottom of it. We're going to see more and learn more from 4 investigations that we know of on Capitol Hill and obviously from Robert Mueller's investigation. What we now know is that there were micro mining, data mining operations organized out of Russia through cutouts that went in particular to 3 Midwestern states, precinct by precinct. Many allege that it could only have been accomplished with sophisticated American political help. Whether or not that is help from any Republican operatives or Trump campaign operatives remains to be proved. It's an allegation. It's a conspiracy theory, yet unproved. So I don't weigh in on any side of that equation, except that the best intelligence experts whom I know, including former directors of national intelligence, say that it could not have been done with normal FSB, Kremlin-mandated operations, that they would have needed some American help, sophisticated political help, to operate that kind of procedure.
It occurs to me to ask you that the president frequently says, and others repeat it, that whatever happened, it didn't influence the election. It didn't influence the outcome of the election. Do you believe that statement is not necessarily
It's not
proven?
necessarily true. This was an election decided. There were many mistakes on the Democratic side that I have cataloged and taken a lot of heat for cataloging. But this election was decided by 77,000 votes. Now, one can argue that the Democratic candidate started with such a lead that she should have had it, sealed, signed, and delivered, and not have had to worry about 77,000 votes, particularly in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, states that she ought to have won. Michigan should have been a warning sign. She lost the primary to Bernie Sanders by 20,000. By 20 points, rather. So there was no question that she should have been far ahead. But the fact that he won by 77,000 votes in 3 particular states and lost the popular vote shows that it was really a very close election. So whether or not it affected the outcome, I don't think we'll ever know. Let me just make a point about, quote, fake news as it's used by the President of the United States, just in the last 24 hours. The fake news is becoming more and more dishonest. Even a dinner arranged for top 20 leaders in Germany is made to look sinister. That from the president.
And unfortunately, the way you read it, you couldn't do the all caps on fake news.
Right. The fake news story of secret dinner with Putin is sick, quotes. All G20 leaders and spouses were invited by the Chancellor of Germany. Press new, exclamation point. That's not the point. The point is, yes, we had pictures of the dinner, the G20 dinner, and knew that there was a dinner for the spouses. What we did not know, what they did not disclose, what even his staff did not know, was that there was a 1-hour, one-on-one, tete-a-tete, only with a Russian government translator, nobody from the NSC, nobody from a State Department interpreter. Nobody knows what Putin and Trump discussed, but we do know that Putin's agenda overall is to get those compounds back, is to get the Magnitsky sanctions.
The compounds, the U.S.
The U.S.
properties
compounds,
in the U.S.
which
diplomatic
General Clapper told me on July 7th were definitely used for espionage. So there are a lot of issues, and we know that there is still a lot of questions about the stated meeting, the 2.5-hour meeting that took place earlier in that same day.
So I want to stick with Russia for a moment. And David, the New York Times has done voluminous investigative reporting on the Russian connection, if you will. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, first, I want to say it's great to be here, and
Thank
I have
you
to tell you
for
of the 2 print publications represented here as the father of teenage and young 20s boys, I would not want to do the count of whether the Onion or the New York Times is more thoroughly read in our household. It would not work out well for me. On the Russia investigation, I think you have to think about this in sort of 3 distinct phases. The first phase was what Russia has been doing around Europe, in Ukraine, all around the Baltics, which you have to consider to be the practice area. I cover cyber and the intersection of cyber and national security for the Times. I was in Ukraine last week. Ukraine is the testing ground for every single technique you have seen used in the US elections, the French election, probably what you will see being used in the German election, okay?
When you say the testing ground, you mean you assume this is Kremlin activity, Kremlin-sponsored activity?
If not Kremlin-sponsored, I mean, this is the difficulty with cyber. You can always figure out, you can usually figure out what country it came from. You can't often figure out who was paying the people who did it. Because in the world of cyber, this is why cyber is different than nuclear. Only governments had nuclear weapons until AQ Khan came along, right? In cyber, governments have them, criminal groups have them, teenagers have them. None of those groups except governments sign treaties. So it's never quite clear what's going on. Patriotic hackers have them. So think of phase one of the years of Russian, not simply Russian, but largely Russian activity. And this is what the Times documented in that series about Russia, and that ran from basically the beginning of last year through the election and the reconstruction that won the Pulitzer this past year. And if you go back into that series, and we put them all together on the Times website as a series, you can sort of see the progression of Russian activity. At some point during the election, and it may be, fascinatingly, right around the time of the meeting that Donald Trump Jr. and Kushner and everybody else walking by Fifth Avenue seemed to go into, right? If you look at that time period in June, the Russians, it's right around that time that the Russians do a switch. They come to the conclusion, this guy might actually win, okay? And then you begin to see, well, the next week, the revelation of the DNC hack, which we got not from the government of the United States and not from the Obama administration, which reacted way too slowly to this, but rather from CrowdStrike. Then you see the president saying to the Russians, go hack into Hillary's emails, even if he said it jokingly. You see him take some policy positions, including in interviews that Maggie Haberman and I did with him just the night before he took he accepted the nomination, that began to question whether or not the United States would come to the aid of NATO countries. That began to say, well, maybe we shouldn't get upset about Crimea and so forth. So you have that policy side of it. Then you have the period that Andrea talked about.
And that's the third period, is what you're saying, the third phase.
That's
Let
the third
me just
phase.
point out the Republican platform on Ukraine, influenced heavily by Paul Manafort, who by then was the campaign manager, and who had an extensive background in Russia and Ukraine.
Absolutely. So something may have changed, and actually we'll hear from John Brennan later on today,
right.
But it's John Brennan who said in testimony that come the summer, he was suddenly getting quite concerned that the Russian goals had changed.
Okay, partly for time, partly because we will have John Brennan later. I want to pivot from whatever happened. It's hard to understand, but there will be facts, if you will.
There are facts.
Okay, there are, and there will be more. To something that is less factual, which is this odd circumstance we have right now of the way that there has always been tension between the President of the United States and the media. Andrea, I said to you confrontational, you said maybe adversarial is a better word. This is different. Explain, please.
It is different, and it's very disturbing to those of us who feel that we have an important role, the Fourth Estate, in covering the White House. I feel an enormous responsibility. I still find myself getting emotional when I walk through those gates. David and I have both been White House correspondents. We've now evolved to be doing our work outside of the White House bubble, which is more challenging and also more rewarding and exciting in a lot of ways. But I started as a young correspondent filling in during the Jimmy Carter years and covered 8 years of Ronald Reagan and the Cold War, where the demarcation was a lot easier, and all the summits with Gorbachev. And then the Bill Clinton years, I was on the Hill during George Herbert Walker Bush. But there has always been, I think appropriately, adversarial relationship. And past presidents, both Bushes, Bill Clinton, who certainly had a very tough time with the press corps, Hillary Clinton, who had an enormously difficult, contentious relationship with the press, even in this last campaign, all recognized the importance, the historically important role. There is a difference now. And the fake news, the fake news allegation calling us the enemy of the people, which sounds like a Soviet-era accusation, I think is very damaging. It's damaging to us as an institution, and it's had its impact. He has an enormous megaphone.
Let me flip this on any of you to ask a direct question, or let's say a sincere question, is the mainstream media out to get Donald Trump, and does the mainstream media behave as the resistance?
My view is, and I'd be interested in the view of the Onion, which you might have a different role here in some way, but my view is the biggest single mistake we could do in navigating our coverage of the Trump administration would be to let ourselves become the resistance to the government in place. Because the only way that you push back at all of the forces that Andrea's quite accurately laid out here is for people to realize over time that those stories that get assailed because they were based on anonymous sources, they usually say illegal anonymous sources. Most of them are highly legal anonymous sources.
I mean, the White House says they're
the White House, right, or so forth. If you look at those over the past 6 months and ask, what is the rate at which stories at which we have published based on anonymous sources have very rapidly turned out to be true, backed up by documentary evidence, including, say, the emails of the president's son in this case and so forth, it's incredibly high.
Maybe that we should tweet these real news.
And that the repetition of the fake news part, time and time again, is an effort to get people not to look at that set of facts, but instead to put a moniker on this, the way the president had at various points on candidates.
It's branding. And let me just point to the Wall Street Journal editorial yesterday,
It's a fascinating
the editorial page called "The Trumps and the Truth," which basically argues, and the Wall Street Journal editorial page has not been, historically very critical of Donald Trump, as president at least. This is a very challenging editorial saying they should put it all out. It's the drip, drip, drip. It's first saying that Don Jr. saying to Sean Hannity, I've told you everything there is, and now we know there are 8 people, including a, quote, former Kremlin counterintelligence official, and experts will tell you there's no such thing as a former counterintelligence
I think
official.
Putin is the one who said that himself, right?
And so if they would just put it all out there, it would not seem as conspiratorial.
Isaac, I want to ask you, you're Colombian by birth, you live in Mexico today, you've lived in the United States. I would like to ask you to represent Mexico and the rest of the world, please, and tell us.
No pressure.
Right, yeah, he's up to it, trust me. Tell us what the rest of the world, both journalists and others, think about all of this.
This is starting to look like a Latin American third world country.
And it's not, it's a laugh line, except that it's not funny,
it's
right?
not. Look, when I used to live in Colombia, and I was a journalist leading Semana, you worried that journalists were going to be killed. Then I moved into the US, and it was wonderful to see that the worst thing that can happen to you is that they don't get invited to a cocktail if they don't like your story. It's not like that anymore. And we as Americans, I'm an American, are very good at pointing out when there are no democratic values in other countries and at calling them out and at criticizing other presidents. We now have to see if we are seeing those values being undermined by our own president. And I think that's a very important issue. Now, from the Univision point of view, remember that it was Jorge Ramos the first time that we saw that behavior that was very worrisome to us.
Famous broadcaster, Trump kicked him out of a campaign.
Yes, and one of his security guards pushed him out, and when he was outside said something like, "Go back to Univision." I was very concerned. I thought that there was something going on there. And in terms of fake news, everything that he has said about immigrants for politics is fake news. Net immigration is less than 0. We have more Mexicans going back than coming in. We can see studies by the Kaufman Institute that will prove that immigrants are entrepreneurial, and within that, Latinos are the most entrepreneurial of immigrants, and more so, it is proved by the US Census in a 30-year study that immigrants are less likely to commit a crime. So everything that has been said about the people that we informed to is fake news.
Yeah, these are facts. So I want to come to your questions. Raise your hand. A paddle will come, or the yellow paddle will come to you. When it's your opportunity to ask the question, please tell us who you are. We'll go back here. I'm sitting here thinking, can we say something nice about Donald Trump? And the thing that occurs to me is, and I think this goes back to his personality and his experience. For all of his hatred for the press, he talks to the press a fair amount.
Well, he relied on the press for years and years. And I did a story last night on Nightly News about the Afghan teenage girls robotics team, twice denied visas. They traveled 500 miles to Kabul twice to get visas and had to go back to their hometown. Finally, the president intervened, I believe because of Ivanka and probably Dina Powell. But the State Department twice denied them visas because they thought that these teenage girls trained to compete at DAR Constitution Hall, for crying out loud, in Washington, D.C., with 157 other teams from countries, would somehow not return back, would overstay their visas. They won a silver medal last night, and we did the story. But I did the story because we didn't have the evidence of what the State Department had done or not done. I did a straight story that the president intervened, Ivanka showed up to award them the medals. And so I think it was a case where he responds to the individual.
Yeah, I was going to say, it shouldn't have, it's not the democratic process. It shouldn't have to work.
But the other thing on your point
Quickly,
is,
David, please.
for all that he beats up on NBC, CNN, the New York Times, so forth, Fortune's been lucky so far, but your moment will come.
We could discuss that,
okay.
yeah.
But for all of that, he continues to talk, probably more than any president I've ever covered.
Yeah. This is my point. Yeah.
Right, and
we could psychoanalyze
but
that.
not hold news conferences.
But not hold news conferences, but he still talks to reporters, even from the institutions that he picks up on.
Yeah, please, tell us who you are.
Hi, my name's Jason Rapp. Good morning.
Good morning.
One, I suppose, comment is that the term fake news, as used by the president, is this wonderful Orwellian turnaround, because it, of course, used to mean the sophisticated placement of propaganda for political purposes, and now we're just talking about it as, what we like or don't like. But I guess one of the things around the GRU activity is that, and the hacking generally, is that the results of those hackings, the Podesta emails, for example, or the placement of opposition research hacked from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and placed into local news outlets, has the effect of the proper or legitimate news media using the otherwise ill-gotten gains for its own journalistic purposes. What is your take on that, and what are the parameters that journalists should follow if the information is coming from a
It's such a great question, because we were just trapped during the campaign. What do you do when it is an illegally hacked email from John Podesta, and it has arguably some news value because the Trump campaign is making use of it? And I think what you do is cover it from the standpoint of what the political impact is without quoting from it. But you're right, we have not figured out what to do with this. And it's turned everything upside down on its head. And I think we have some major questions.
It occurs to me, David, the Russian spies, the propagandists of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s would have loved this. They didn't have this.
Yeah, I mean, they were putting news articles in like farm newspapers in the Midwest because nobody had gotten around to inventing the internet yet. And so what this has done is taken, as you point out correctly, an old Stalin-like technique and just put it on steroids because the web isn't able to do it. But I think that Andrea raises a really good point, which is we have a lot of thinking and self-reflection to do on this point. I myself was writing stories based on some of those emails, what we learned from the Podesta thing. I didn't think that any of it was terribly incriminating to Hillary Clinton, but we were writing them, while I was also writing stories about what the Russians were doing and the oddity of this technique. And when we discussed the phases before, remember that the first time the Russians went into the DNC, it was the FSB and the FDR, the two traditional Russian intelligence agencies, and everybody thought they were just there for surveillance. And it's only when the GRU came in that they actually took the material and made it public.
Weaponized it.
Isaac, Andrea, and David, thank you so much. It's an important, sobering, stimulating conversation. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Please go that way. Thank you. Okay, before we move on, it's my privilege to thank our sponsors, our gold sponsors first. Cornerstone On Demand, Flex, Herman Miller, KPMG, Microsoft, New York Stock Exchange, and RBC Capital Markets. Our silver sponsors, Expa, Fusion Media Group, IDA Ireland, and Siemens, as well as our bronze sponsor, View Inc. I would appreciate a round of applause for them. Well documented in the media, Wells-Fargo, one of America's largest banks, has gone through some very tough times in the last year or so, scarred by a scandal that had employees creating some 2 million fake accounts and firing 5,300 workers. It was a dark time for a company with a rich legacy, and it has a new leader to help it come back from that, who, by the way, wants to talk about technology as well this morning. So please join me in welcoming the new CEO of Wells Fargo, Timothy Sloan. It's a bit of a journey there, Tim, so I'll say good morning and
It's good to see you.
thank you. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
So I thought it might be a good way to start to have you introduce yourself to,
Sure.
to the Fortune community, to the business community. You are, I think, I hate to start with someone's age, but I think it's relevant. You've been with Wells Fargo.
57, it's okay,
57,
yeah.
and you've been with Wells Fargo
That's
since.
young these days.
Oh yeah, you're very young. It's 57.
Wanna go out and run?
Is the new what is it? You've been with Wells Fargo since 1987. Tell everybody
Right.
a little bit about your career path up until becoming chief
Sure.
executive last fall.
Yeah, so my wife and I moved out from Chicago to Los Angeles. We thought we were both native Midwesterners. Thought we'd be there for a couple years because everybody from the Midwest thinks everybody in Southern California is crazy, and they're right.
Yeah, I was gonna add that.
And no, that's right.
Yeah.
And I found a great place to work, which was Wells Fargo. That's why I moved out there for a job. And I've been in a variety of different areas within the company. I've been in the workout business. I've been on the credit side. I've started some new businesses. I've been involved in a number of acquisitions and divestitures that we've done. Introduced a number of new products. We're going to talk about one today. And then also got involved in being the chief administrative officer, so running a number of the enterprise functions. So I've done almost every job at the company. None of them well, but enough to become the CEO.
Well, that's a humble Midwestern
Yeah.
statement, but we'll come back to the circumstances of your becoming CEO, which is on everybody's mind and is a very important topic. But you're gracious enough to come to a technology conference, and we're going
Sure.
to talk about
Yeah.
technology. But first, I just want to make the observation. You didn't mention anything being in this very big retail business that Wells Fargo has, and so I think you didn't work in that part of the business ever. Is that correct?
Well, I actually started out in banking before I worked at Wells Fargo as a teller in the summer. I worked for Savings and Loan of Michigan, and then as I was going to the University of Michigan, I worked my way through school by continuing to work on the retail side of that savings and loan. So know enough just to be dangerous in the business.
But not at Wells Fargo. And just for
Correct.
people who aren't in banking, when people in banking say retail, that's what when people when we go to the bank and go to a teller, that's the retail.
Sure.
Versus the commercial banking, which is where you spent your career.
Yeah, though we define it today as not just, and we're going to talk about technology, it's not just going into one of our branches. It's using an ATM, it's using us via mobile, it's calling one of our bankers on the phone, or being, using your laptop.
Good. You want to talk about innovation. Wells Fargo, I'm a Wells Fargo customer. I have
Thank
been
you.
for 20 years.
Yeah, thank you.
And as I told you when we first met, Wells Fargo had a very good website before most other banks had even bad websites. This isn't new for you. Talk about how you think about technology and innovation and what you're trying to do now.
Sure, so let me start back at 1852.
All right.
Right.
I get it. I know where you're going with this.
Well, the reason is when you think about what our business was in 1852 when we were founded, we delivered people and packages by horse. How does that company become one of the largest, most successful, notwithstanding some of the issues that we've had over the last year, which I'm looking forward to talking about.
I'm sure.
How does that company become the Wells Fargo of today? It becomes the Wells Fargo of today by innovating. We've been innovating for 165 years. In terms of our customer interactions and the consumer interactions that you're referring to, we were the first bank in the mid-90s that really rolled out online banking. And it's interesting for me today because I hear a lot, and there's many great disruptors that are in this audience. We're a disruptor, right? We introduced online banking. We were the first bank over in the last couple of months to introduce a cardless access to all of our 13,000 ATMs, to every one of them. And I could go on and on. But the point is that we look at technology as an incredibly important part of our business today. We had 1.9 billion consumer interactions in the second quarter. 75% of those were by mobile. Having said that, 51 million times a month, somebody comes into one of our branches.
This is a business audience, so go ahead and go deep for a moment on how you've structured the business recently around this topic of innovation.
So we've made two very important organizational changes over the last couple of years. One is that while we've been very innovative for our history, we were doing it on very much a siloed basis. So a couple of years ago, we brought all of our innovation activities together in one place. And what's great about that is it allows us to be more efficient and effective in terms of how we're investing our money, but also it provides a more uniform customer experience, so you don't have technologies that are built product by product. It's really with a consumer focus. So that's number one. Number two, in October of last year, soon after I became CEO, we formed a payments group. When our customers think about, consumer customers in particular, think about Wells Fargo, they don't think about us on a product basis. They think about, well, Wells Fargo provides my checking account. Wells Fargo allows me to get money out of an ATM. It allows me to move money by mobile, use a debit card, use a credit card. If that's how they think about us, why don't we put all those areas in one place? And we did that. We combined that with our virtual channels group. And so that we've got mobile and online and the phone, all of our phone bankers connected with that group, and then we put innovation in that same place. And it's really helping us accelerate introducing new technologies to our customers.
So keep going with payments and tell everybody what new you have, the thing you have that's new today.
So one of the things that we're very excited about is a new product that we're announcing today called Control Tower. When you think about our customers, or any of you, even if you're not one of our customers, you've put your payments information in a lot of different places. You pay for the gym, you buy a movie, it's everywhere. And then what happens when you want to make a change to that credit card or debit card? You say to yourself, where in the heck have I put everything? Why not put all that in one place? That's one of the things that Control Tower is going to do. When you're traveling, you want to turn on and off a card. How do you do that? That's going to go in Control Tower. Many of our customers are sharing their financial data with a number of different providers outside of their bank. We frequently get calls from our customers saying, I didn't know I did that. Well, they just forgot, right? That's understandable. Why not put all of the places that our customers are sharing their financial data in one place? And that's Control Tower.
Who are some examples of those institutions that you've already signed up to? Because they need to be signed up, right? Like in an API fashion, I assume?
Yeah, that's right. This product is going to be rolled out in stages because some of the data that we're going to need to really make this a terrific experience for our consumers is somewhere else, so we've got to put APIs in place. But Intuit, Xero, things like places like that would be perfect examples.
When I think of although we're in Aspen, we'll call this a Silicon Valley crowd. When I think about payments, I think about Stripe, I think about Venmo, I think about PayPal, I think about a European company, Adyen. I don't necessarily think about the big banks. You think I should, correct?
Well, I think you should, because first, all those the companies you just mentioned are good customers of Wells Fargo. They rely upon us to be successful in their business. So some days they're our best customers, but at the same day, they're also competitors. That's fine. We've been doing that forever. one of the other exciting products that the banking industry has gotten together to roll out is Zelle, where if you're a Wells Fargo customer and you want to send money to a Chase customer, now all you need is their mobile phone number or their email, and you can send it under $500. It's free and it's real time.
I looked this up because I didn't know how to spell Zelle. It's spelled Z-E-L-L-E. Show of hands for how many people are familiar with this product.
Okay, so
And
we
then
have a little
keep
bit
your
of
hands
work
up
to
if-
do. That's exciting.
Yeah, keep your hands up if you've used the product.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So
Yeah.
just to reinforce that it's not that complicated, my 80-year-old mother and father love it. They send money to their grandkids send money to them. They're very, very smart individuals, but it reinforces that it's an easy way to make payments, and anybody can do it.
You make the case that all of these companies that I named, we didn't talk about Apple Pay, is another one that you work with, that this is all, you essentially, this is all good for Wells Fargo because they have to work with Wells Fargo. In several of these instances, and if maybe only thinking about market capitalization achieved, wouldn't it have been better for Wells Fargo to have invented those products and owned that market?
Well, I think first, it's not necessarily it's better for Wells Fargo. It's better for our customers. Our view is that we want our customers to have their financial relationship with Wells Fargo. If you want to use another payments provider because that's your choice, that's fine as long as you come back to Wells Fargo. Apple Pay is a great example, right? We were one of the first banks that was on Apple Pay. That's a terrific convenience for those folks that have iPhones. Not everybody in the world has an iPhone. If you want to get to your Wells Fargo accounts via your iPhone, that's fine from our perspective, right? We want to offer our customers convenience as long as ultimately they come home.
Do you have any insight into why Apple Pay is taking so long to gain traction with merchants?
Well, I think that it's primarily one of cost, right? Because they had to change out their machines.
Yeah, but Apple has a lot of money. I would think they would want to pay to help with that.
Maybe they will. That's their decision to make. They're a bunch of very smart people.
Indeed. Last technology question. I as you know, the day I came to visit you in San Francisco, I used the cardless ATM feature for the first time, and it's good. But you have to get a code.
Say it's good one more time.
It's good.
Okay.
And by the way, I like the name Control Tower too.
Yeah.
We learned about a product yesterday from Amazon called Treasure Truck, which I like these catchy names are good. Okay,
Yeah.
so I like it, but you have to get a code on your phone. What I'd really like to do is either put my thumbprint on the ATM or do iris biometrics the way they do with Clear at the airport. When's that coming? And if your answer is not soon, why not?
Well, it's probably not going to become soon to the ATMs. Instead, our thought, and I think generally the industry is coming to the same conclusion, is that we want our customers to give our customers choice. So if they have a way that they're comfortable using authentication in a method, and they're more comfortable using their phone, I think it's probably going to come more from the mobile device, more likely than it is going to come from the ATMs.
Okay.
But there's still a debate going on. Yeah.
Okay, but you're not enthusiastic about. It's not urgent for you.
No. Well, no, customer security is urgent.
Okay.
We're spending a lot of time and effort focused on authentication technologies, whether it's through your iris, whether it's facial, whether it's voice and the like. We're rolling out to more of our customers voice recognition just because so many of them do interact with us via phone.
Great. So Tim, Wells Fargo, very old company, as you've already pointed out, had a sterling reputation as sort of the aw shucks achiever out in San Francisco, not one of them fancy New York banks, but also a very aggressive culture of what I've interviewed both your immediate predecessors who'd never missed an opportunity to talk about Wells Fargo's famous upselling of accounts to customers. Then last fall happens, and it turns out your colleagues have been doing some very dishonest things. How did that happen?
Well, I think it happened for a number of reasons. First and foremost, in our retail banking business. So I want to make sure that it's clear that the primary challenges we've had were in our retail banking business. That's a part of the company. I don't mean to diminish it, but the opportunities we have in our wholesale group and our consumer lending group and our wealth and investment management group are just different. But within our retail banking business, we had an incentive plan that drove the wrong behavior for some of our team members, and that was inexcusable. It created problems over a period of time. That's been well reported. We should have and could have moved faster, and we didn't. We've taken responsibility for that. We scrapped the old incentive plan. We've got a new incentive plan that was rolled out to about 100,000 team members in January. The early results are it's working very well. It's very focused on service, advice, growing relationships over time, teamwork, as opposed to selling products. The other challenge that we had is that we were a very siloed organization. Within each of our business lines, we had all of our enterprise and control functions. We had to fundamentally change that. We've moved all those enterprise functions on a centralized basis outside of the business lines, so there's a better check and balance in terms of risk.
Forgive me for not remembering that Wells Fargo has an expression for the number of different accounts that each customer has.
Right.
What's that expression?
Well, we call that our cross-sell ratio.
Cross-sell ratio, you bragged, the higher number was better, 7, 8 was an average for quite a long time.
About 6.
Okay, thank you. And this is like a checking account, a banking account, a credit card, a debit card. Has there been a change in that number since last fall?
Well, I don't know what the number is because we don't look at it that way anymore.
And you're not measuring it.
We don't talk about cross-sell anymore. What we do is we focus on good relationship management and building relationships over time by providing the right service and advice to fulfill the vision of the company, which is to satisfy our customers' financial needs.
You certainly have the data on the number of accounts each customer has. You say you're not collecting it or looking at it
That's
anymore.
correct. We're not.
What has been, one of the ironies is that given the macroeconomic climate, the interest rate climate, and the whatever climate you want to ascribe to optimism about the new administration beginning last fall, Wells Fargo's stock is up significantly since this scandal hit. What has been, in your estimation?
I'm sure it's because of the new CEO.
Well,
I was waiting for that. I thought that was going to be the punchline.
I like the
What happened?
I like the toggling from humility to the opposite. It's very effective.
Yeah.
What has been the impact? Has there been a financial impact on the company, and has there been a reputational impact on the company?
Well, there's no question there was a reputational impact on the company, and I'd love to be able to tell you that all the changes that we've made in the company have miraculously allowed us to turn the page in a 9-month period, and that's just not the way it is. It takes a while to, and it's going to take more time for us to rebuild our reputation. We made some big mistakes. We've taken responsibility for those. We've made changes, and we're rebuilding the reputation of a great company. In terms of the economic opportunities for the company, we've been in this slow growth, kind of lower interest rate environment, though in that same period, the last 19 quarters, Wells Fargo has been one of 2 companies in this country that's generated over $5 billion a quarter for our shareholders. The 2 companies, Wells Fargo and Apple.
Has there been a change to the trend line of your number of customers in the retail business since then?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a change in the rate of growth.
Okay, so you have not had decline. You have not had attrition in customers. You've had slower growth in adding customers.
Well, the rate of growth versus attrition has slowed. So there's always churn that occurs in any business, certainly in the banking business. We bottomed in terms of all of our customer metrics, consumer metrics in particular, customer experience, customer loyalty, the growth of primary checking accounts, credit cards, and the like in the 4th quarter, and we're seeing steady growth. We're not back to where I'd like us to get, but given all the changes that we have going on in the company, I'm very confident that we'll achieve our historical growth levels.
Would you generally say that retail banking products are sticky? I haven't done it. I haven't made any changes to my Wells Fargo accounts.
Yeah, I think if you're providing good quality customer service and advice, you're providing convenience, you're providing reliability, then absolutely they're sticky. But if you don't meet customer expectations in any of those, they're not sticky at all. People move with their feet.
I think one question that came up immediately when the scandal sort of hit the front pages and John Stump retired and you were named to replace him, the cynics out there said, this guy Sloan was the president during all this time, or the chief operating officer. Why him? Why not somebody who has no connection with any of this?
Sure. So I was named president and chief operating officer about 10 months before I became CEO. But I've been senior leader of this company for a long period of time. I was CFO, I was CAO, and when I say taking responsibility for not moving as quickly as we should have to deal with some of the mistakes we made, I take responsibility for that. Having said that, the board of directors said, gosh, we're in the midst of a crisis. Do you want somebody that really understands this company, that's demonstrated an ability to lead in a variety of different businesses? They concluded that I was the right person for the job. But I, serve at their convenience. And the moment that they decide that that's not be the case, then, I'll be doing something else.
Last thing on this, Tim. Did Warren Buffett give you any advice when you became CEO?
Yeah, he did.
Warren Buffett is and has been for a very long time a large shareholder in Wells Fargo.
He's our largest shareholder, and in fact, we're Berkshire Hathaway's largest shareholding. We're just so fortunate to have arguably the world's greatest investor as our largest shareholder. And Warren is very good at providing the experiences that he had. And we talked, for example, about when he stepped into Salomon Brothers and had a reputational issue, and then some of the changes that he made, and it was a good guide for me.
What was his advice?
His advice was to move quickly and to ask a lot of the team, and that's what I'm doing.
Your questions, please. Yeah. I see one over here. The paddle is coming to you. Please tell us who you are.
Nathan Rosenberg from Insigniam. Like Adam, I'm a longtime customer. I'm also a shareholder, and I've also consulted with your company. So
thank you.
I have an emotional attachment.
And thanks for the disclosures, Nathan.
Yeah,
yep.
Thank you.
My oldest brother, Werner Erhard, and Michael Jensen just wrote a paper called Putting Integrity in Finance that got published in the journal Capitalism and Society. Mm-hmm. Without integrity in financial markets, the markets don't work. Mm-hmm. I actually ran into the buzzsaw, and a young man in the branch opened, I think, 6 accounts, 4 ATM cards. What in the culture, I understand the rewards part of it, but what in the culture allowed for that?
Well, I think that within the retail banking business, the incentive plan drove also a management focus that reinforced the culture of selling products as opposed to fulfilling the vision and providing the right service and advice. So the way to change that first is to scrap the incentive plan, roll out a new incentive plan, but then also reinforce training to branch managers, to district managers, to regional presidents, and so on. And so we're going through that right now to change the culture that was driven inappropriately by the incentive plan.
Up front here, please.
Yeah.
Hi, Marshall Dormeyer. I have a question.
You're not a customer?
I
What do
am
we
a
need?
customer of yours, actually.
Okay, good. I just want to check.
Yeah.
Are you a happy customer?
I'm a happy customer.
Good, okay.
I have a question for you. We're all aware that the money that we have in our accounts with you are numbers in a computer screen someplace.
Right.
We've had a lot of discussions here about cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
We're aware that certain healthcare and other industries have been shut down with sufficient cyber attacks.
Yeah.
How does the banking industry approach me, not just authentication of me, but in a sufficient cyber attack, how do we reestablish at some point what money I have with you? What is the proof to unwind after a sufficient cyber attack, and what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Yeah, so I'm glad you talked about cybersecurity, because we view that as one of the biggest risks that our country faces, but also the banking system could face. Because to your point, if we ever had a really big cyber attack, you really lose the trust of our customers, and it's a binary risk. So when you look at the $7.1 billion that we spend in technology, which is what we spent last year, we'll probably spend a little bit more this year. A good portion of that is spent in cybersecurity. What we do is we try to make sure that the threat perimeter is as lessened as possible. We make sure that from an access management standpoint that we have the right team members that have access to certain information. We make sure that we're hiring the right folks to attack us every day on our own account. We make sure that we have the right software technology to continue to monitor things on a 24/7 basis. We've got 3 cyber fusion centers all around the world so that we can do that. And then we make sure that we've got the resiliency in terms of your financial information, so that if there's a problem on a Wednesday morning, that we can look back to what things looked like the night before on Tuesday, and we can rebuild whatever account. So far, we've been fortunate, but we're vigilant every day. I think it's the biggest risk to the financial services industry today.
Tim, last question.
Yeah.
It's been much commented on recently that we're, I think, 9 years into an economic expansion in the United States.
Correct.
What is, and you have a team of economists, what is Wells Fargo's forecast on when that expansion will end?
Well, it's hard to say. I think our economists and our risk folks are generally optimistic about the continuation of a slow but steady growth. Hopefully, we can see the gridlock break in Washington, and we can get some improvement in terms of tax policy and a reduction in regulation in some areas. And I think that would be a net positive, and we think that could add 50 basis points to 100 basis points to the growth rate.
GDP growth rate.
Correct. Sorry.
Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Good to see you, Adam. Thank you.
I'm going to go this way, you go that way. Thank you. All right. We have a very appropriate next conversation with the chairman and CEO whose company gained popularity by refinancing student loans taken out by graduates from top universities, but quickly started to pursue a more ambitious vision. Migrating to personal loans and mortgages, plans to roll out a wealth management tool, insurance products, and checking accounts are now all in the works. The bet is that by making millennials feel as if they belong to an exclusive club, it can turn an entire generation into lifelong customers, and the free exclusive happy hours don't hurt the case. To explain the next steps in killing the banks, including the bank where he used to work, please welcome, which is Wells Fargo, Chairman and CEO of SoFi, Mike Cagney, to be interviewed by Aaron Griffith.
Hey. That was quite an intro. So just to add on to that a little bit, so Mike started SoFi 6 years ago. It's now worth $4 billion.
More than $4 billion.
More than 4. What's the exact 4 point?
It's more than $4 billion. That's all I can tell you.
All right. All right. And so the company does student loan refinancing. This year, you guys started mortgage lending, personal loans. But most ambitious is SoFi's plan to launch personal deposits, so essentially becoming a full-on bank by the end of the year. So we're going to talk about that. But first, I want to put you on the spot a little.
Sure.
In December, SoFi decided to postpone its IPO, I think mostly because the public markets have not been so kind to online lenders. So I'm curious, are you waiting for that perception to change, or are you trying to shift SoFi's image away from online lending?
So I think there were a couple of dynamics that were going on. And what we did, rather than do a public offering, is we did a private round. Silver Lake led a $500 million round into SoFi.
You got a nice shout out from Egon earlier this week.
That's good, and at a nice bump in valuation. And to us, there was a statement that we wanted to make, which was the industry in general was getting hit pretty hard on the public market side, and we were able to raise capital from a tier 1 investor. We have a whole host of folks that followed into that rounded out that round, quality investors, but at a valuation that was a premium to the last round that we did. I think from a standpoint of being public, obviously going public introduces a very important value to us in that it's a branding exercise. But it also introduces a lot of other complexity in terms of quarterly reporting and having the flexibility to build your business out the way that you want. Our view has always been we'll go public when we're ready to. We're profitable. We're growing at a very aggressive pace right now.
Does that mean that you're not ready?
I wouldn't say that we're not ready. I'd say that
you lost your CFO earlier this year as well. So is that a part of it?
It's a process of getting the right folks in who have experience taking businesses public and managing that process.
Okay, so just to wrap that up, can we expect an IPO this year?
We're opportunistic about when we go public. There's no urgency to do it. We're very fortunate that we've got a host of investors that have a relatively long time horizon, like SoftBank, for example, who's our largest investor.
That's right.
So within that construct, we have the luxury of figuring out when it makes sense for us to go public, and we'll do it when it makes sense.
All right, so let's talk about the deposits. Extremely ambitious, taking on the banks. Why don't you talk through the why of that?
So if you think about our value proposition to our members, it's really around the idea that we want to be everything to these members. SoFi started with the premise that if you're 35, whatever service you get from your bank is not the service that you want. There's a huge chasm. There's a lot of misperception around millennial customers, the idea that they're fickle, they're not loyal, they're price sensitive. These are all wrong. They're actually extremely engaged, they're extremely loyal, they care about price, but it's fourth or fifth in what they care about. What they want is speed, transparency, alignment. And if you can get that to them, you can create a very sticky engagement. And our view is, while we run positive contribution margins across our credit products, and we have a very profitable business, it pales in comparison to what the lifetime value of that relationship is worth. And not having a deposit product means that the bank that they have that deposit product with is going to constantly try to cross-sell them and pull them back to the bank and introducing some vulnerability into the business. And so what we did is we approached this with two strategies. One, in December of last year, we bought Zembanks, and a lot of people didn't understand why we were buying Zembanks. They thought we were buying it to get into the payment space. What we bought Zembanks for was we had a production deposit infrastructure application, the FDIC has approved, that was working today. And we're taking that, putting it into our broker-dealer, and we're able to offer a effectively sweep account, so a checking account that has FDIC insurance. We're not a bank in doing it.
You're not offering that currently, though.
We're offering it in the fourth quarter.
Got it.
And then concurrent to that, we're also applying for an ILC license, which has obviously introduced a lot of comments.
Yeah, can you talk about that?
So to me, there's a lot of irony in us applying for an ILC. So an ILC license, what's unique about that is it's a banking license where the bank is captive to a non-bank holding company. And the challenge in doing a traditional bank charter is that if SoFi just applied for a bank charter, SoFi Inc. would have to become a bank holding company. And there are lots of things that SoFi Inc. does, like our career resources, our networking, our dating events, our dating app now, which is pretty cool. I hope I get to talk about that.
All right, we'll talk about the dating app.
But there's lots of things that we do that are core to the value of our business and core to the brand that we couldn't do in the context of a bank holding company. And so the ILC is a way that we're allowed to continue to do things in SoFi Inc. that are specific to our brand, but have a fully regulated bank under that. Now the thing is, the only thing that lives in our bank, or the only ambition that we have to put in the bank, deposits and credit card. So our unsecured lending, our mortgage business, our wealth, all of that stays outside of the bank. And what lives in the bank is deposits and cards.
And so, am I correct that you will be, if successful with this, the first new charter issued in 10 years?
12, I think, yeah.
Wow. You mentioned lifetime value of your customers. What's the lifetime value of your customers currently, and how could that change once you add deposits?
So I think people often abuse lifetime value as an excuse to not be very efficient running their business. And so as I pointed out, we run positive contribution margins across every product that we have. We run 65 to 85% contribution margins. But again, if I make $2,500 on a student loan refinancing transaction or $15,000 on a mortgage, it pales in comparison to what I think is $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 that we make over the lifetime of that relationship. If you look at how banks are valued in the US, banks are valued anywhere between $2,000 and $100,000 a customer. And we don't think it's unrealistic. We have 350,000 members today. We'll have 500,000 at the end of this year, 1 million the year after that, 2 million the year after that. We've been doubling every year. 2 million customers, maybe we're worth $25,000 to $50,000 a customer, which gets us in the $50 to $100 billion valuation range. And to get there, we have to have a diverse product set, and that includes the deposit product. And it's not just from a revenue standpoint, it's from a defensive standpoint.
And so, I mean, the most valuable thing to me is the brand, correct? I mean, you're appealing to millennials who hate their banks. So instead of going through all of these hoops that you're jumping through, why not just partner with a bank and let them benefit from your brand and you benefit from their banking infrastructure?
So I think...
Or sell to one, perhaps a Wells-Fargo.
I always joke that Tim would buy us just to put me in a cube farm in Vacaville for 3 years to punish me. But I think the key to what we're doing, you can think about what we're doing as technology or think about what we're doing as product. The reality is, I remember this situation. I was in China. I was meeting with one of the big internet companies there, and I was sitting across the table from someone. They had a stack of papers 4 inches high, and it was every screen in every application that we have, including the operator applications that aren't publicly exposed. And I said, this is fascinating. Technology, you can have an immediate impact on technology, but ultimately technology can be replicated. Product can be replicated. We created student loan refinancing. It didn't exist when we started that product. There are now lots of
There are a lot of fast followers in that
category. We still dominate it, right? So we own that market, but there are a lot of fast followers. The key is around culture. you have to have a culture of commitment into this customer base. And if you don't have that, it's not going to work. And you know, there was a point in time about a year ago, one of the big brokerage firms tried to buy us. And
Which one?
I can't say. And they have a wealth management.
Give us a hint.
They have a wealth management business with lots of 65, 70, 75-year-olds who are starting to die, and the 35-year-olds aren't coming on the platform. And they said, you know, boy, wouldn't SoFi be a great solution to this? We buy SoFi and they just get all these millennials onto our wealth management platform. And you know, our customers are called Henrys, that high earner, not rich yet. The not rich yet is the operative part there. And I sat down with them and I said, look, your issue isn't that you can't reach these people. You have more marketing dollars than we have. Your issue isn't tech. I mean, you listen to Tim talk about he has $7 billion to spend in tech. I've never spent I don't think we'll ever spend $7 billion in tech. The issues around culture, and do you have a commitment and culture to deliver value into that customer base? Because this is a very unique customer segment. And the industry, the financial industry, and why they're so vulnerable right now is they don't realize that the model they have isn't going to work for that next generation of consumer.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned this idea of the Henry. Could that focus draw you unwanted regulatory scrutiny around fair lending practices?
So I think there's a couple of dynamics to this. One is I have members who are 19 years old and I have members who are 90 years old. So there's nothing that says you have to be 35 to be able to come into SoFi. Now, obviously, the value proposition has been cored and geared towards what a 35-year-old wants. But if you think about our core value proposition, speed, transparency, and alignment, it turns out you can be 50 and like speed, transparency, and alignment as well. It turns out that everybody likes to use their phone versus having to go to a branch. You know, I had an interesting example because you know Tim was talking about 50 million people going to branches. I've had 40-some SoFi events that I've hosted or been participant of, and everything from happy hours to wine tastings. I never have gone to a dating event because I'm happily married. But I asked them, have you ever been to a branch? And almost universally, no one's been to a branch in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Right? So
there's no branches on your roadmap then?
No, absolutely not.
All right, we are running low on time already, so I want to ask if there's any audience questions. Otherwise, I wanted to, can you talk a little bit about cryptocurrency? We had a really interesting conversation backstage about the way that you're looking at it. And this morning, the cryptocurrency panel, there were a lot of questions about how it can actually be applied. This is an interesting application.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to disentangle cryptocurrency with blockchain. Right, and the challenge with cryptocurrency is that it's a medium that doesn't hold value, and so to use it as a transaction, use it as effectively currency, the problem is it's still pegged back to the dollar. So if the dollar didn't exist and all we had was Bitcoin, we would be fine. But the fact that it trades to the dollar and its value fluctuates so significantly, it makes it nearly impossible as a store of value to use this currency. It's great if you're going to Argentina because you have currency controls there. And I mean, I shouldn't be saying that. They won't let me back in Argentina. But it has some purpose, but its application for commercial transactions is limited right now. The blockchain and Ethereum, on the other hand, are absolutely fascinating infrastructure applications. And one of the ones that we're thinking about is title insurance. If you think about title insurance, the way it works today when you buy a house is you pay someone $5,000 to go to a courthouse and look at a paper record and see if there are any liens on your property. And so the premise would be, why couldn't you abstract that out, put it into a distributed public ledger where you have absolute truth in terms of what those liens are and what that information is? You encrypt that, so it's public, not private, but it's encrypted. You sell that encryption key as the revenue source to the county to be able to do this. The key on this is you need a county that's willing to do a wholesale conversion, because if you run these, yeah. So if you run these in parallel, the blockchain or the Ethereum aspect of it's not enforceable because they can revert back to the paper trail. So you need to find a county that's willing to do a complete conversion onto a distributed network, and when you have that, there's an interesting application there, and that's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
So that's something we can possibly look for later this year from you.
Well, we're trying.
All right, I'm gonna one last call for questions. All right, in the front here. All right, very quickly, and maybe.
Yeah, hi, Rob Liebert, AFP. Can you talk about the credit scoring system, how you look at that, and how you do things? From what I understand, you do things quite a bit differently, and what the implications of that are.
Yeah, I think so. Traditional credit scoring is based around FICO and debt to income. And those are good metrics for ascertaining credit, but they're not great metrics for ascertaining credit. And I think there's a whole bunch of interesting nuances here. We look at ability to pay as a primary driver in terms of assessing credit. So we take your income, less the bills that you have that we see, less the bills that you have that we don't see. Do you actually have free cash flow or not? Can you service your debt? And if you can service your debt, that's a key indicator for us. We look at things like where you went to school, what you do for a living, how long you've worked for. Because if you lose your job, how robust are you going to be to get reemployed? That's an important driver as well. And we look at characteristics in terms of things like credit usage. So did you have 3 inquiries in your credit report in the last month? That's a big red flag. And there's things that we can show statistically that tie into that. But what's more interesting is if you think about where greenfield opportunity is in credit, if you look at thin file, for example, and you look at situations where you can augment traditional bureau reporting with things like cell phone data, social graphs, there's a lot of interesting application. The challenge is that we don't have a robust framework in the US to test that, because the CFPB says you can't use anything in underwriting that you can't prove is statistically impacted credit, but I don't know how you prove it impacts credit unless you put it in the underwriting. And so there's a little bit of a chicken and egg dynamic, and there's some discussion about sandboxes that we can use to test this, but they've not been fully vetted out. We've been able to underwrite in a way that's very different than the industry and has produced outstanding credit performance. So we've been able to get AAA in our securitizations. If you look at our student loan refinancing business, the cumulative defaults in that business are in the single basis points. If you look at our unsecured consumer credit business, we defaulted at about 1/3 of where a prime personal portfolio would, at a Discover or a Cap One would default.
And do you expect that to change if the economy stops growing?
So, it's always virtuous to start a lending business in 2011 versus 2007, and we're very cognizant of that. We actually think our member base would behave very robustly during an economic downturn. And some of that is because a lot of our members, doctors, dentists, medical professionals, that's about 1/3 of our folks, that's a non-cyclical industry, and they don't tend to be impacted by macro cycle. But in general, if you look at just the schools our members go to and how robust they performed during the last cycle, we're pretty confident about our credit.
Well, Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next guest is the CEO of Evertune, was previously the CTO of Minted, co-creator of Google Desktop, and engineering leader of Gmail ads. For 7 years, she watched as the founder of VC fund Binary Capital faced no consequences for harassing women founders who are pitching him for investment. Last month, she and 5 other women went public accusing him of sexual harassment. And after days of their behind-the-scenes efforts, he resigned and the fund was all but shut down. In our guest's own words, if not now, then when? If I'm going to bet my reputation on protecting other women, then what would I be hoarding it for? For a conversation on what we can all do to avoid the systemic failings that led to this and many other similar incidents, please welcome Ninian Wang and Fortune's Nahal Levram.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the tray. So before we get started, I just wanted to say something real briefly. I know it seems like we've been devoting a lot of time at this year's conference to this topic, and it's true, we have. But I think we're really at a moment here in the tech industry, and this isn't important just because of the impact that it has on individuals, and there are many of them, but it's important because it has impact on all of us, on the industry, and you're seeing that right now. So I hope you will stay and listen and ask questions, and that we can move the conversation forward into real action. So with that, Ninian, thank you for being here. Can you just provide a little bit of context? Why did you come forward now, and what went into coming forward? Because it wasn't as simple as calling a reporter and saying, hey, I want to talk.
So I was harassed by Justin Kovac 7 years ago, and after 2 years, I knew of 2 other friends who were Asian female CEOs that he had also harassed. And at the time, it didn't seem like there was anything I could do to expose him. So I was warning female founders one at a time. And recently, many of them have emailed me saying, I remember you warning me back then. But over many years, I watched as his firm got bigger and bigger, and it didn't seem like there was anything I could do. In the past few months, I've been working with a reporter, and Justin had harassed many women by this point, including groping, kissing them, warning them they would never work in the industry again if they didn't do what he wanted. He was very litigious and threatening. The reporter had a new mortgage and a small child and was very afraid he would lose his mortgage if Justin made good on his threats. So it took a lot of work to get enough people to come on the record. I had one woman to my house for dinner and convinced her over several hours that it would be worth it to go on the record. I started joking with the reporter that this had become my second job to get the article out, but it was unpaid and would probably damage my career. But I thought that it was worth it. And we finally got the article out. Justin told the reporter that his lawyers would be in touch. And for 8 hours, nothing really happened. There was no buzz. There's no social media. One of the other named women told me it was her worst fear that she had used her name and it failed. And I felt like I jumped off a cliff, took 2 people with me. And then actually Ellen Pao texted me. She's a friend, an investor.
And real quick, just remind people who Ellen Pao is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, Ellen Pao had a famous lawsuit, gender discrimination lawsuit against Kleiner Perkins, and has spoken out very actively about gender equality in Silicon Valley. So she spent hours tweeting and retweeting what people were writing. Sarah Lacey also had coverage, and gradually through these grassroots and getting people to speak up, we were able to get more visibility and create more buzz. Many male VCs after that evening started to, on Twitter, say vocally that they were against what had happened. So I had my goal as, there could be great social media and hashtags, but what's really important, the goal is to get the predator out of his position of power. So I wanted to figure out what we needed to do. I found the email addresses of the limited partners, the investors in the firm. I emailed them. I forwarded that email to the other accusers and asked them to email the LPs. I found anyone I knew who might know the LPs, tried to give them more information, looked for more evidence that I could present. Anytime a new accuser contacted me, which were several within the next few days, I tried to connect them with a reporter. And it felt like Binary Capital's PR person I was in a battle with that person where they were issuing statements, and I was alone in my apartment trying to get Justin out of a position of power. But we succeeded. So he resigned 3 days after the article, and a few days after that, their fund was canceled. The third fund that I know of to ever be canceled in the history of Silicon Valley, over 30 years. The 2 other partners in his firm have also resigned or offered to resign. A few days after that, 24 women went to the New York Times and told about their tales of sexual harassment. It turned out that one of them, Dave McClure, had been accused by multiple women. He had already been removed from a position of power, but this had not been communicated to anyone. So he was still in a position where he was meeting with women. One of his accusers called me on the phone and asked for advice, and I told her she needs to figure out what the goal is and then communicate that goal very clearly. So she put out a statement on Twitter asking for his resignation because there were 10 accusers. Another accuser also put out her record of what happened with the same request. And the next morning, Dave McClure resigned. The following week, which was last week, Frank Atvill of Ignition Partners, a managing partner of that firm, also resigned due to multiple incidents of inappropriate conduct. And I think that there have been many stories of sexual harassment over the years. And what's important, I think can be a lot of discussion and buzz, but what's important to me is measurable results. Predators who have been preying upon many people over the course of years should be removed from their position of power. And it should not take the amount of work that we had to go through and people putting their careers and mortgages on the line to do that.
And Ninian, you mentioned Ellen Pao before, and she lost her case. Do you think that the fact that you and the other women who have come forward recently have had tangible impact, tangible results we're seeing them happening. Do you think that I know this is a controversial question, but do you think that the fact that you're not suing, that people are paying more attention to it and that it gives it more legitimacy? I'm not saying that that's the case, that's the way it should be, but But what's your take on that?
Well, I think that people have said to me that it was more convincing that we all had nothing to gain and a lot to lose. So it's hard to point fingers at why someone would say this and put their reputation on the line when they have nothing to gain. That being said, many people have told me that real change occurs when the law changes, and that the only way the law changes is through lawsuits. So I think that's unfortunate. But I actually think a lot of people who do, now I believe that some people who do lawsuits are doing it at a personal cost in order to get the law to change so that people can actually be protected. Part of the reason that this went on for so long, in addition to enablement, is that EEOC law does not cover this case. So it was not illegal to do this for 10 years.
So I want to open up to questions in just a couple of minutes, but can you spend some time walking us through what your recommendations are for what the industry as a whole should do at this point? I know you touched, those of you who were in the town hall yesterday heard a little bit of it, but go into more detail and the steps that you recommend.
Yes, so we've seen in the 3 firms that spoke out, the ones that tried to hide, minimize, pretend it was not a problem are now suffering a lot of financial difficulties or are canceled. And the one that recognized it, was proactive, terminated the person, and publicly communicated this has a much better chance of survival. So any sizable company has harassment, and the firms that recognize this and proactively work to combat it will be the ones that will do better. And in terms of how to combat it, every person in here knows how to design a product where they are not the target user. You would go interview the user. And I think that there are 5 women who have spoken out that I know of, and VCs have not actually yet asked us about our experiences and how the system has previously failed to enable founders to speak out.
Are you open to VCs coming to you
Yes.
to talk to you? Anyone in here?
Sure.
Yeah?
So I think that they will. I just
It hasn't happened yet.
It should be said, yeah. And I think if you're thinking of designing, imagine how you design a product. You know, if someone said to you, this previous product had 3 systemic failures in the last month, we're not going to do any postmortems, we're not going to talk to the people involved, or interview any users, we're going to go in a room, and next month we'll present you the new solution. I think we would all have an assessment of how likely that is to work. And each person knows what to do to design a product for a different demographic. You interview the customer, and it may be awkward, and if this product hasn't worked for them before, that initial conversation might be uncomfortable, but that is how you get the product that will work. I also think that when someone is fired for sexual harassment, that should be made public. Much like how when someone commits a sexual crime, they must register as a sexual offender publicly, whereas people who commit other crimes are not required to do that. And I think in the case of firing, we keep it quiet because often it's a matter of fit. And someone who is fired from one company may be a star in another company. But in the case of sexual harassment, someone who was a predator in one company is very likely, after they were quietly fired, to get another job 2 weeks later and continue harassing women for years to come.
And just to point out, there were complaints about Justin, and he went and started a new fund and was able to do that. So this is a real thing and has happened several times.
Yes, and in fact, his previous firm put the harassment accuser under a non-disparagement contract and gave excellent references to Justin, which enabled him to continue harassing women for 5 more years. So I think that non-disparagement and non-disclosure agreements should not apply to founders who have suffered sexual harassment as defined by the EEOC. And I think that when firings occur, it should be public. Lastly, I think that men should speak out. And I think it can be nerve-wracking because you don't want to say the wrong thing. But I think otherwise there's deafening silence. And if 7% of women are, 7% of venture capitalists are women, then the other 93% should publicly say something to express that they're not okay with the situation. I think also what we've heard.
Good?
Oh, okay.
Should we go to questions?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Question over here.
Stephen Wolf Pereira from New Star. First off, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for being brave. I think it's incredibly important that we hear this, and we don't need to apologize and ask people to stay in the room to hear this, because this is actually one of the most important issues in the Valley, so thank you for that. 2, full disclosure, I'm on the board of the Level Playing Field Institute with Ellen. Mitch and Frida Caper are big proponents of unconscious bias training, and you see a lot of eyes rolling in the Valley when they talk about it, but it really is an important issue, so hopefully more firms will take that on. But I'm curious, when you see this kind of behavior continuing over and over, at the end of the day, it's all about the money, and how do you actually go to the money to really make an impact? Have you spoken with institutional investors, the LPs that actually give the funds to all the VCs? Is that a way to also help force the hand? Because those LPs, the institutional investors, do actually care about this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think that the original reporter was very smart to include the LPs in the article, which incentivized action. I know there are many people who right now are having conversations about how to create legal protections and policy protections, so including helping hold LPs responsible so that they can hold venture capitalists responsible. So there are many conversations going on. If you would like to help, you can email me at ninian@gmail.com, just my first name @gmail.com.
Thank you. Question over here.
Hi, Caitlin Kyle, S&P Global. First of all, thank you. We spoke last night, and you're so brave. How has it, I think people, you clap and we say, yeah, that it's so wonderful what you did, but what has happened since then for your own career? Have you felt that maybe some companies or firms that you work with, because you're a vocal person that will take action, how have you personally, how's your career been since this happened?
Mm-hmm. So firstly, this whole thing has been way beyond what I expected. I thought I was jumping off a cliff and I'd be somewhat damaged, but it was the right thing to do. But I actually feel as though halfway off the cliff, the community caught me. And I was worried that some people would not want to work with me as much, but it has actually been a very pleasant surprise in that I received many emails from people saying they want more to work with me, and I got many introductions, and one VC saying, there's a check with your name on it waiting for you if you ever decide to need that. So it has been a pleasant surprise.
Question over here.
Hi, that makes me very tall. Dawn Lyon with Glassdoor. I just also want to commend you for your courage and thank you. One thing I'd love to talk about and get your opinion on is this decency pledge. There was a lot of coverage of it after it was announced. Almost every woman I've talked to about it, including myself, has done an eye roll. I said on stage yesterday that we're living in the United States, and to have a pledge to treat people with dignity and respect that is guaranteed under the Constitution and quite honestly a human right seems a little ridiculous. I'd really love to talk about it, especially in the room, because I don't know if there's anyone here who's taken it, but I'd really love your opinion on, is that going to have an impact?
Mm-hmm. I think that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I would like to have laws that protect founders, and I would like LPs to be completely responsible, and I would like policy and an ombudsperson and so forth. But until we get to that point, if someone the day after wants to suggest a solution that will get us one step of the way toward that, I think that's great. And I think what's worse is the deafening silence of people, particularly men, who are so afraid that they will be criticized and eye-rolled that they say nothing. And to me, that is much worse. So if someone says something and it works to some degree and helps the conversation, and maybe it's not the perfect solution, but it gets us one step closer, I commend that.
Hi, my name is Kay Koplovitz, and I'm with Springboard Growth Capital. And I just wanted to commend you for what you've done. Thank you very much, and for all the people that spoke out. But what I think is really critical for women entrepreneurs, and we've brought almost 700 to market since 2000, women entrepreneurs in technology and life sciences, is to really get them funded, to really get them supported. 86% of our companies get funding, 81% are in business today, over 18 years, 170 exits and 15 IPOs. And I only say that so that people in the room recognize there are actually successful women entrepreneurs raising capital. It's a hard process still, but the more women that are in the ecosystem, and I agree with whoever said it yesterday, women are supporting women today. That's really critical, and it is really true that women, and we've been speaking out for them for almost 20 years now. So there are solutions in the marketplace, and the solutions are even beyond addressing an issue of harassment. The solutions are bringing more successful women to marketplace and making them a really critical part of the economy. And if anyone wants to hear more about what the solutions are, I'm happy to talk to you. But let's move on. Let's solve this problem, and let's get more women funded. That's the important thing that's really going to change this culture.
And I think you do talk about how having the presence of more women in other industries has led to less harassment. So good point. I want to take one. We need to wrap up very, very soon, but one more very quick question over there, and then I'm sorry, we'll need to wrap
Tom Soto
up.
with Frontier Impact. I'm a longtime GP of a large number of pensions, and there is a real era of change going on with the pensions from a governance point of view. And all that you said and all that you've gone through, not only do you have to admire, you have to really, there's an old quote which is sometimes the most courageous, the one who stands most alone. But that doesn't last long. And obviously what happened was there was a snowball effect where sometimes people are just looking for courage to attach their wagon to, and that's what you did. And there are a lot of men in the room who are supportive of this. There are a lot of people in the room who are supportive of equity across all phases, gender, race, and so forth.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to ask you to get to your question, though, because
my
we do
point
need to
is
wrap
this. Don't underestimate the value of what you've achieved and converting that into even a small movement and being able to get some reform by then going to the Council of Institutional Investors, which are all the LPs, or CalPERS and CalSTRS Investment Committee, and putting a demand on them to have, as part of the due diligence questionnaire for GPs, those concerns highlighted. They will likely adopt it. If that doesn't work, then you go to the Senate or the Assembly Oversight Committee on PERS and have them legislate it. You don't need to go to the feds. If you want to talk further, let me know.
I want to give you the last very, very, very brief final word.
Okay, well, two things. There are a lot of actions and movements behind the scenes in progress now that I am supporting. Secondly, what we've seen in the press is the tip of the iceberg. The people who are willing to speak out are the people who said no. But no one does this for 10 years if there aren't some women who are too afraid to say no. And I speak out for those people. And if you wonder, why did they not just say no right then, over and over, then think of the last time you were in the boardroom and someone made a sexist comment, and whether you loudly said no over and over. Thank you.
Thank you. I just, real quick, I want to thank you. I know you've been thanked a lot for your courage and bravery. I want to thank you for your hard work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, our next guest joined the CIA in 1980 and became the agency's first director during the Obama administration. As director, he led an internal overhaul to the agency's structure in order to better deal with current threats, a main focus being on cybersecurity. And in May of this year, we watched him testify before a House Intelligence Committee about Russian meddling in the 2016 election and his concerns that Moscow was trying to influence the Trump presidential campaign. Never a dull moment for this gentleman. We are honored to have him with us today to discuss the risks and opportunities facing the U.S. and the world. Please welcome former CIA Director John Brennan with legendary journalist, author, and president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, Walter Isaacson.
Thank you very much. I think he's the legendary one, so we'll start with him. Welcome. You served 6 presidents, great career in the CIA since 1980, head of counterterrorism as well as the director of Central Intelligence, and a great nonpartisan voice in America. I want to start with something you said, which is we have no consensus on the role of government when it comes to cyber realms. Explain what you meant and what should be the consensus.
Well, that digital domain has profoundly changed our lives across so many different spectrum, from political, economic, informational, commerce, trade, business. That is the environment where most human activity, I believe, is taking place today. And unlike on terra firma, where you know what the role of the police officer is or FBI or whatever, in that digital environment, there's still a lack of consensus in my mind about what the government's presence should be and authority should be in terms of monitoring activity there.
So you were around when a cyber attack starts to hit Sony. You all would have had a doctrine if it had been a missile attack hitting. What happened?
Well, first of all, you know, the thing about a missile attack, there is a return address from it. You know where error is coming from. With an attack in a digital environment, whether it is theft of IPR or information or a disabling or destructive attack, you really need to understand exactly what's the attribution there. And it takes some time to be confident that you know where it comes from. And then you have to make the determination about what was the significance of the attack, because all these attacks are very unique. And during the Obama administration, the 4 years, and when I was at the White House and then 4 years at CIA, we really tried to define what the doctrine would be. What would be the threshold for an attack against the private sector that would generate some type of US government response, which could range from kinetic to asymmetric, sanctions, whatever else. And then
Well, wait, let me suggest one threshold: meddling in our election. Why didn't you all do something?
Talk about a sui generis phenomenon that took place. It was an ongoing election where there was concern that the Russians were going to continue this effort. We came across it in the spring of last year. We're trying to monitor what they were doing, trying to prevent them from doing more destructive efforts. We wanted to really have a better sense of the range of things that they might do, because we've seen them involve themselves in European elections for many, many years and around the globe. And it's not just in the digital environment and the cyber environment. A lot of active measures that go on as far as propaganda and false reports that go out. So we were trying to, as intelligence officers, we were trying to make sure we had insight into what they had done, what they were planning to do, as well as what their strategy was.
So wait, you said spring. It's actually probably right at the beginning of June is when you start convening people, I've read. Is that right? That's when did you first find out?
Well, I'm not going to say exactly the date and time, but it was in the spring we became aware, and then in the summer months is when it started to come together, and it was clear to me and to others that this was a campaign that was authorized by Mr. Putin, had multiple dimensions to it, and we needed to make sure that the FBI, NSA, CIA were going to be working as close together as possible.
How would you know that it was authorized by him personally?
Well, we have ways. I mean, that's what intelligence professionals do, is to make sure that we understand, capabilities, activities, but also some of the motivations, as well as who authorizes it. Something like this in particular, where Russia was going to be engaged in a US presidential election, that has great significance. And certainly I would think, and it is our assessment, as well as information we have, that Mr. Putin authorized something of that significance.
And this is around June, at least we know that you convene interagency groups, right? Do you know at that point which American citizens might be meeting with Russians? There's a June 9th meeting, for example, with Donald Trump Jr. that's caused a lot of news recently. Would that be something the intelligence community would put together?
Well, the CIA and the NSA have foreign intelligence authorities and responsibilities, and so we collect information against foreign actors, whether they be nation states or people. In the process of collecting that foreign intelligence, if we happen upon information related to US persons or entities, it's called incidental collection, we share that immediately with the FBI. The FBI has the legal authority to pull those threads and investigative leads. And so through the course of this ongoing collection effort by part of CIA, NSA, and others, as we happened upon information about US persons, entities, those associated with the campaign or not, we would immediately share it with the FBI, and then they would take it and do further
And they would share with you the other way, meaning?
Well, one of the reasons why I put together a fusion cell of CIA, FBI, and NSA officers is because I didn't want to have walls between those agencies so that there would be a very small group that could share the most sensitive information. which is what happened. And so within that environment, very sensitive intelligence information, investigative information was shared so that the experts could put those proverbial dots together.
Well, speaking of dots, I mean, I'd love to just go a little bit through that month of June. The meeting is June 9th. You haven't really said, you know, personally what you knew, but obviously there's an interagency force. June 13th is when CrowdStrike happens. Explain what that is, and is that when you saw some dots being connected?
Well, it's when there was clear evidence that the DNC and the DCCC were hacked and that emails were then taken and were released. And so then it became a very public matter whereby at least those entities were invaded by some actors. The FBI right away was on it. CrowdStrike was the cybersecurity firm that was working with the Democrats to protect their networks and systems. But again, the CIA was not going to engage with any of those domestic private sector actors or the Democratic or Republican parties. Again, it's the FBI taking our information and other information that would be the conduit for alerting them about some activities that are going on and also giving them some heads up about the steps that they should take to protect their systems.
Would it be fair to say, though, that that's around the time period where you went from being concerned to being alarmed that something really was happening?
I became very alarmed in the summer months, yes.
And what did you do? You went to the, I mean, I've read, I don't know if it's true, went to the White House like with a sealed envelope and secret meetings.
Well, I'm not going to confirm anything that might be in the press, but one of my main responsibilities if I am alarmed about something of national security significance is to make sure that the president and national security principals are aware of that, which is what I did. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that I was able to inform the congressional leadership. And so there is something called the Gang of Eight, which is the leadership of both the House and the Senate. And I wanted to personally brief them for two reasons. One is to underscore the significance of it, because when the director of CIA goes down and briefs them personally, it should send some alarm bells off. But secondly, as you can imagine, CIA, NSA, and FBI have some very sensitive collection systems and assets that are at risk. And I wanted to keep this as closed as possible because we needed to continue to rely on those collection systems and assets in order to give us continued insight into it. So, you know, starting in the summer months and then going into the fall, we were trying to really race against the clock to see what we could do to uncover and therefore have the ability to thwart any additional actions on the part of the Russians, which is why I spoke to one of my principal counterpart in Russia, who's the head of the FSB, Alexander Bortnikov, on August 4th. And I told him in no uncertain terms, you go down this road, it's going to impair relations between the United States and Russia for many, many years. American citizens are going to be outraged, even if you're trying to promote the prospects of a candidate that they support, because American citizens take very seriously one of the principal pillars of our democracy, which is a fair and free electoral process here. And I guess, in some respects, as we were talking before, I may have been wrong in some of my analysis that I share with Bortnikov, because it seems as though some Americans are not as outraged as
Yeah, you
I
said
thought
it would be unanimous. When you went to Capitol Hill in the Gang of Eight, there wasn't unanimity.
There was a range of reaction. One is that they wanted to understand exactly what we knew and how we knew it, very understandable considerations and concerns. I walked them through it. And as you know, partisan waters run deep in Washington, including in the Congress.
But didn't that surprise you that there was a partisan reaction when Russia is meddling in the election system?
It surprised me that there was not more deep interest in this and taking the word of the intelligence community and doing something about it then. I thought that sometimes partisan considerations overshadowed the national security concerns that should have been evident.
In retrospect, should you have been more public about it?
It was quite known publicly about the hacks and how Russia was being pointed to as the culprit there. It was known that President Obama approached and confronted President Putin in September. Jim Clapper and Jay Johnson came out with a public statement in October. Those discussions that we had, we really were almost between a rock and a hard place. One of the candidates who's running the presidential election said that it was unclear whether or not he was going to accept the outcome of that election. And so if President Obama and the Obama administration came out more publicly saying that the Russians are really trying to advance the prospects of the Republican candidate, and that is by the titular head of the Democratic Party in the White House, I'm sure that that would not have gone over very well. So I think what they were trying to do, the policymakers, is really balance what it is that we could do to stop and frustrate Russian efforts, make it very clear to them that this is very serious and they're going to be held to account. But also, folks knew that the Obama administration was going to sunset on January 20th. So the decisions that were made to PNG 35 intelligence officers of Russia, close those dachas down and do some things with sanctions, that was a reaction not just to what they did in the election, but their series of harassing acts against...
Wait, this is the crime of the century, some have said, and you actually kind of agree with that, right? In some ways, a cybercrime trying to hack into our election system. And you're talking about PNGing a few Russian officials. What other options could there have been, in theory?
Well, you know, in terms of cyber doctrine, what you can do is to have a symmetric cyber strike.
In other words, release all of Putin's financial records?
Yeah, maybe. There are things that you can do, but the consideration is that going to be purely punitive and is going to lead into an escalatory cycle in the middle of a presidential campaign? And then it gets worse, and then the Russians do more, which really calls into question the credibility and integrity of the election in November. And so we're trying to do everything possible to stop them, but not allow it to be a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of what the Russians were trying to accomplish. Their first objective was to undermine the credibility and integrity of the U.S. electoral process. Clearly, that has been done. They were trying to damage Hillary Clinton. They thought she was going to be elected. They wanted her bloodied by the time she was going to be inaugurated. And they were also trying to promote the prospects of Mr. Trump because they felt as though they could work more effectively with Mr. Trump.
You know all of that from intelligence means, not just from...
Yeah, as an intelligence professional, we were very, very careful to make sure that we looked at all of the information we had at hand during this period of time, putting it against our wealth of knowledge about how Russian intelligence services, Mr. Putin operates, and that's why we had such high confidence judgments in these assessments.
And the candidate you mentioned, now President Trump, said there was no communication whatever with the Russians between his campaign. You knew that at the time when he said it, that was false?
He said things, I knew things. I'm not going to pulse one against the other.
And were you somewhat, what was your reaction when he said it was a great honor to meet with Putin a week or so ago?
Well, I felt that this was his first meeting with Mr. Putin while he was after his election. And here's the person who assaulted our democratic process, our election here, who invaded Ukraine, flouted international law, annexed Crimea, and has done so many things over the years, has suppressed opposition within Russia, has been responsible, I think, for the deaths of individuals who are opposed to his regime. And to say in that first meeting, before they had the bilateral meeting, that it's a great honor to meet him, it made my blood boil a bit, and that's why I decided to say that I thought it was a very dishonorable thing.
And do you think that he has undermined the intelligence community by questioning the assessments you just gave us?
Well, he certainly hasn't given them a lot of confidence that he takes what they say seriously. He keeps pointing out some mistakes that the intelligence community made in the past, like the Iraq WMD assessment, and that's a fair criticism of things past. There have been so many changes and adjustments made in the intelligence process since that time. And again, this was high confidence judgments about what the Russians were doing. And so Mr. Trump takes the intelligence product when it suits his interests, whether it be on North Korea or Syria or other areas, but he seems to be a very selective consumer of information and not just intelligence. And I think that is very, very dangerous because not only does it undermine the confidence of people within the intelligence community, but it undermines the confidence of our allies and partners overseas, because if he's questioning U.S. intelligence, how should they feel about it? So the next time that we go to one of our partners and says, we really need your help on this issue because we have good intelligence that says X, why should they believe Mr. Trump or someone else in the administration after they have denigrated the quality of the intelligence community's work?
Wow.
I don't feel strongly about it.
I can tell, that's why. I'm going to ask you a question that you don't have direct knowledge of now that you're no longer in the agency, and it's more of an FBI matter. So I hope you can just speak as a citizen, an informed one. How long do you think an FBI investigation has been going on, and what would they be looking for other than just pure collusion?
Well, this started out as a counterintelligence investigation as far as what the Russians were doing against our election. And as Mr. Comey has said publicly, they started this last summer, about July. And the FBI does a very, very thorough job of these counterintelligence investigations. I've been closely associated with them in these matters over the course of many years. They will look at relationships, they'll do a lot of interviews, they'll take a look at financial activities, and to see whether or not those financial activities might lend insight into who had a relationship with whom.
Wait, you're talking about they would have the financial records if Russia had any financing with the Trump organization?
What I'm saying is that the great FBI agents will pull the threads to see what might be available, either in documentary form or based on interviews of people. And so they build the case because what they're charged to do is to see whether or not criminal activity has taken place. And here now, I see three dimensions to this. One is whether or not collusion took place between Russia and U.S. persons. And that's a fairly high bar, and that's what they're looking at. Second is obstruction of justice. Whether or not in the course of this investigation that there have been individuals who've tried to cover the tracks of anything related to collusion. And the third one is maybe financial irregularities. Whether or not there were some activities that took place that bypassed U.S. laws, regulations, whatever. And so then with the special counsel that has a pretty wide mandate and someone like Bob Mueller who has tremendous experience, as you start to pull those threads on collusion, on obstruction of justice and irregular financial activities, who knows what they're going to come up with, but I think they're going to be doing it very methodically. Bob Mueller is not just starting from scratch when he was appointed. He is able to take the FBI's investigative work over the past year and build upon that. So this is something that I think the American public deserve insight into what actually happened, what the Russians did, and what type of criminal activity, if any, U.S. citizens were involved in.
You mentioned the three areas. What do you think is the most sort of explosive possibilities?
Well, I think any one of them, depending on what type of information, intelligence, and therefore evidence of criminal activity might emerge. And you never know what is out there. I only had insight into some of the things from a foreign intelligence perspective. But again, I give my FBI brothers and sisters great credit for their work. And we'll see now how long this is going to take, whether or not there will be exoneration or some type of inculpatory behavior that's going to be uncovered. I don't know at this point when it's going to happen.
When the Russian hack happened and you knew it happened, and you, I assume, had an array of options, and you picked closing down whatever, or the president picked closing down PNG. Were there things that you could or could have done, I'm talking in theory here, in Russian infrastructure to give you more control should a president want to pull the trigger?
Well, let me just say that the United States intelligence community, law enforcement community, and military community have tremendous capabilities in the cyber realm, in that digital domain. And they are used to help to protect this country. But you have defensive capabilities and you have offensive capabilities. And I know a lot of people point to the capabilities that the Russians or the Chinese and North Koreans, Iranians, and others have and say, why don't we have those capabilities? Well, I think as a U.S. government, we certainly do. It's a question of when and how you exercise them and what you're hoping to trigger or inhibit or prevent by doing that. So I don't want to get into the types of capabilities we have, but they're formidable, and they are ones that we could leverage if we so chose to do it. Now, the question is whether or not we want to engage in the types of activities that our adversaries are engaging in and that we are condemning. Do we want to go down that same path? And it's a question. So to me, I think you want to be able to put together a doctrine that deters, helps to prevent, helps to defend these type of attacks, and make it very clear to individuals that we're not going to accept it. But I think there has to be two dimensions to that doctrine. One is the cyber dimension, and then the non-cyber dimension, the asymmetric dimension.
Like sanctions or something.
Like sanctions, even military action.
Yeah.
That should
but
not
let's
be
get
ruled
to
out.
the cyber offense, which you just talked about. And you mentioned it as a deterrence. Deterrence, it was almost here at the Aspen Strategy Group 40 years ago. They developed a doctrine of deterrence. Part of that doctrine is that the other side has to know what you can do. Is it conceivable you would or could do things where you put code in Russian infrastructure so that they would see it, so they would know?
Well, do you really want me to tell you what
Yes.
capabilities are? Yeah, I'm sure you do. As I said, you can ask me this question many different ways. We have capabilities that we can deploy that would
But I
be
mean, do you
very
want them
effective.
to know?
Well, and you can, rattle the cage. You can do certain things and say, and sort of push them and say, okay, we are going to respond to you. This is just a very limited example of what it is that we can do. But again, going down that path, because some of our adversaries also have capability, and they could throw it against not just the government, U.S. government, they could go after companies.
Yeah,
And they could-
33,000 electric companies that still use Windows 10.
and then they can take actions against your U.S. citizens in their countries. Now, we should not gauge our reaction to what they could do against us, but that is a consideration. So what we're trying to do is to lead by example and not just by showing just how capable or maybe our cyber capabilities are.
Well, that gets to the very place you began, which is how does this country develop a cyber doctrine, rules of engagement? We took us many years to have strategic arms talks with the Russians to figure out what intermediate range nuclear forces would do if something happened to folk. Are we doing that for cyber?
That policy is evolving. During the Obama administration, we did look at the doctrine and look at the various dimensions of it, and there are multiple dimensions. There's attribution, how confident you are in the forensics in your knowledge about the source of it. And even if the attack emanated from a particular country's sovereign soil, do you know that the leadership of that country authorized it? Or was this something that was just done by some rogue element within that country?
Yeah, that makes it fundamentally different from nuclear. You kind of know if a missile comes,
Oh, absolutely.
it's probably authorized.
Right, so you punish then the government, but the government in that country may not have had any knowledge of it. Now, we can't give the government a free pass, if these attacks are taking place from their sovereign soil. And that's the point we made to the Chinese many times. You have sovereign responsibility to make sure you police up what's going on in your country. Because if you look at a lot of the attacks that took place over the last decade or so, most of them, in terms of theft of information, whatever, they were emanating from China. And so much takes place from China. But not all of that is done with the direction or authorization of the Chinese leadership or the Chinese military. But still, they have to make sure that they are doing what they can to prevent those types of attacks from taking place. So you have the attribution challenge, you have the consequence threshold challenge as well, in terms of at what level do you decide you're going to retaliate. The Sony attack by the North Koreans was a destructive attack. They destroyed computer systems and networks there. That's why it generated reaction in terms of sanctions. Now, should that have generated some type of kinetic action against North Korea? Maybe. But you have to think through the second and third order effects of that. So I think, hopefully this administration is continuing to fine-tune what that doctrine should be, what should be the framework in terms of attribution, consequence threshold, and purpose, inhibiting further attacks, deterrence, punitive, retaliatory, or whatever.
We only have 10 minutes left. I want to get to questions of the audience, but getting us away from cyber to raise one more thing. Here this summer, so many scientists from Berkeley, Harvard, MIT, talked about genetic engineering, CRISPR technology. They could make viruses that they could weaponize and knock out an island or a country. As CIA director, when you weren't waking up worrying about the Russians hacking, did you have to worry about these new forms of technological attack?
I worried about it as a CIA director, but I also worried about it during my first 4 years of the Obama administration when I was his assistant for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, because the potential for biological agent attacks was something that worried me greatly in terms of how we'd be able to detect it, how we'd be able to prevent the spread, what we'd be able to do as far as countermeasures are concerned, how to get our capabilities in terms of vaccines or antidotes, whatever else that's out there, the distribution systems. And biological agents are one of the things that a lot of the terrorist groups have not seriously pursued. They have looked at it, they have dabbled in it, but they still go for a lot of the kinetic attacks that draw blood. When I think about a successful biological attack, not only the lethality, potential lethality of it, but also the psychological impact that it would have, it is something that I think that we as a country need to be very concerned about.
I see that paddle.
Yes, my name's Larry Gelman, and I wanted to ask you a question. You've detailed some of the things that we could do and sort of drawn up a list of potential options, but given the contempt or disregard, at least, that the president has shown for the opinions and actions of the intelligence community, as a practical matter, do you really believe that the things that the intelligence community thinks might or should come to pass have a chance of coming to pass without more cooperation from and with the president?
Thank you, Larry.
I think it depends on the target. So, for example, if the Iranians were to be responsible for doing something, I don't think the Trump administration would hesitate at all. Maybe the same thing is true as far as North Korea. I think this issue of the current administration or Mr. Trump's position vis-a-vis Russia raises serious questions about what he would be willing to do to be able to demonstrate to Mr. Putin that we are fed up with the actions of the Russians, we're not going to take it anymore, and we're going to take actions against it. And I think there's an obligation on the part of this administration to do that.
Adam Lashinsky with Fortune. You mentioned obstruction of justice, collusion, and financial improprieties. But recently, you've also addressed the subject of treason. Could you discuss that, please?
Well, you know, I was being questioned by the House Intelligence Committee about Russian MO, their intelligence activities, asking me to explain a little bit. And so I've followed the Russians for many, many years. I know they're very good, they're very aggressive, and they're pervasive. And they use a lot of tactics, which is to bring somebody into the tent before they even know that they are interacting with a Russian, much less a Russian intelligence official. And so that's the traditional MO of recruiting individuals. Build trust, build a relationship with them, and you don't even know that what they're after is for you to commit treason against your country. A lot of people recognize that when they're going along the path, but a lot of people are unwitting of it, and they want to help somebody that they may have befriended. They think it's a business contact. They think it's something that is not really going to be damaging to U.S. national security, when in fact it is. So that treasonous path can be very long, and it's one that too many people have been able to have walked down without knowing it until it was either too late. But if you're smart and if you are keeping in mind what your national security responsibilities are, not just as a U.S. official, but as a citizen, you have to say to yourself, wait a minute, time out, and that's when you go to the FBI and say, I think I'm being played by somebody on the behalf of a foreign intelligence service.
Michael Miller, PC Magazine. On another topic, I would like your opinions on encryption. There's been a big discussion as to, many of the tech companies believe that we should have very strong encryption on things. Some governments have said there need to be backdoors. What do you think?
I think it's really critically important to have the strongest encryption possible, and the U.S. government, I think, wants that. The Obama administration wanted it. However, it does present a bit of a conundrum in terms of how you're going to carry out the rule of law if you can have tremendous amounts of information and data contained on a mobile device where there is unbreakable encryption that nobody can get into. So even if a judge issues a writ from the bench saying that the government has a right to access this information, just the way they do when they want to get into a bank deposit box or an apartment building or a warehouse, there's no way to do that when you have this encryption that is unbreakable to everybody. And so my concern is I don't want those mobile devices to be safe harbors for terrorists, proliferators, intelligence officers from foreign countries, pedophiles, organized crime, and whatever. So that's where I say, to me, it shouldn't be a question of its security versus privacy. It's how are we going to, in this 21st century, in a digital environment where so much information can be compressed onto a mobile device, how is the government, which has a responsibility to protect its citizens, how is it going to not allow that, again, to be a safe harbor that could lead to our destruction? Because if we don't have security, we're not going to have privacy, civil liberties, or prosperity. And so that's why I tell the technologists as well as the national security professionals, you've got to work harder on this. I don't have the answer to it. But we cannot say we shouldn't have encryption. And a lot of times I think it's a dialogue of the two poles, and they're mischaracterizing the positions of the others. I was told I don't support encryption. That's BS. I certainly do.
David Sanger from the New York Times. Good to see you. I had two questions that came out of your fascinating timeline that you discussed with Walter. The first is that the United States first became aware of the Russian activity inside the DNC in the summer of 2015, the summer before the one where you were particularly alarmed, and that's when the FBI started going to the DNC, and we've all read or heard about the story of their sort of miscommunications for a year. In retrospect, was that a blown opportunity to be able to get at this early? And similarly, since the Russians had been inside the White House unclassified system, the State Department's unclassified system, the Joint Chiefs of Staff unclassified systems, all before the hack of the election, do you believe we underreacted in those cases? And had we reacted more strongly, could we have created some of that deterrence that you just discussed?
On the first one, I don't know if it was a blown up opportunity in terms of the conversation that took place between the FBI and the DNC and DCCC or whatever. I wasn't privy to those conversations. And whether or not we should have acted more aggressively against Russian intrusions into official government networks that we had known about earlier. The cyber realm, the cyber security challenge is one that made my head hurt when I was in the White House as well as at CIA. You know, it's like a water leak. It goes to so many different places. You try to stop the leak, and other leaks develop. And the Russians are, again, very capable, and the use of malware and unclassified systems, and they are very ingenious in terms of all of the different ways that they get people to, open links or attachments or whatever. What more aggressively could we have done? 20/20 hindsight, is always great. I don't believe that anything that we would have done would have stopped the Russians from doing these types of activities. We might have prevented a leak in one area, but if anybody believes that the Chinese or the Russians or the Iranians or others are going to stop their cyber intrusions into U.S. systems, they're going to continue to do this. And that's where I think the government's role in this cyber realm is critically important, because I think a lot of Americans are quite understandably upset that the government hasn't done more to prevent these attacks, but at the same time, they're not all supportive of more aggressive U.S. actions in that environment. And that's where I think this balance has to take place.
Real quick last question.
Hi, I'm Heather Bruner with WP Engine, and first off, I just want to say thank you for your tremendous service to our country. It's very inspiring to hear your patriotism and everything you've done for us, so thank you. My question is, as a room full of business leaders, technology leaders, could you give us a call to action? How can we be better stewards, better patriots to protect our democracy as business leaders?
A 30-second call to action.
Okay, to the extent that you can be in contact with your elected representatives, Democrats and Republicans, I am neither, but this partisan environment in Washington is going to undermine this country's security and our future prosperity. We really need to be working. We need to be working together on this, and this cybersecurity issue is not just a government issue. I believe that there really needs to be a call for an independent commission of government and the private sector, along with NGOs and futurists and technologists, whatever, almost like a Manhattan Project, because I think if there's going to be a solution or a way to proceed, it has to be an unprecedented partnership between the government and the private sectors so that we can make sure that we do as much as possible to protect our information, our data, and that environment. Because if we continue to go this way, and as I said, the dysfunctionality right now in Washington because of political agendas that are overriding national security considerations, I find outrageous. And that's why, to the extent that you, as the individuals who are keeping this country great in the private sector, in the technology and scientific worlds, put pressure on your representatives to put their partisan leanings aside and try to work together more. I've never seen it this bad in my 37 years of work.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the next chair of the U.S. Cybersecurity Commission. He just volunteered. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We're about to close, everybody. But before we do, and before Walter leaves, most of you probably know that Walter is retiring as CEO of the Aspen Institute. So this is very likely the last time that, as CEO of the Aspen Institute, he'll be here with us at Fortune Brainstorm Tech. Although, just as I committed to bringing active duty military to our conference next year, I'm also committing to an open invitation to you, Walter, to come back.
I accept.
You know, Walter Isaacson is not only a former colleague of ours at Time Inc., former head of CNN, that much maligned organization, now one of America's foremost men of letters, has done wonders for the Aspen Institute, but has been over many years now, a terrific partner for us here. Not only have you been a gracious host, but you've done so many memorable interviews on our stage. So Walter, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, John Needham. Thank you, Rich Batista, everybody. I'll see you next year. I'll see all of you next year.
Perfect. And then real quickly, I'd like to invite the three co-chairs of Brainstorm Tech to join me on the stage. Aaron Griffith, Michal Lev-Ram, and Andrew Nuska.
You, but I hit my mark.
As they walk up, you can give them a round of applause. They're making their way to the stage right now. I don't see Andrew, but there he is. Okay. Quick announcement, mark your calendars. The dates for next year's Brainstorm Tech are July 16th to 18th, right here at the Aspen Institute. We'll let you know when registration is open. Don't forget Brainstorm Tech International in Guangzhou, December 5th and 6th. We have a website you can go to for information on registration, and you can also reach out to us. We want to thank all of you, the participants, for coming and making this gathering so successful. There wouldn't be a Brainstorm Tech without you. Personally, on behalf of the co-chairs, I can tell you we love it when you come up and tell us how much you enjoyed yourselves. We also love it when you tell us or send us emails about what we could do to improve, because we do it each year and we're very proud of that. Safe travels. We look forward to seeing all of you next year.